Hi, my name is Nick, and this tooltip is on understanding materials. Elements in your drawing have materials applied to their surfaces. Every material has finished properties that determine how the material reflects, emits, and absorbs light. These factors can affect lighting in a rendered scene. Let's take a look at one of the textures in our model. I'm going to double click on this wall, and it will bring up the properties of the wall. Under the properties, I'm going to select appearance, and then I'm just going to select the exterior surface, and I'm going to select the material that I'm using for that particular wall. Once I select that, it will bring up the materials catalog, and I'm just going to double click on that material to bring up its materials properties. First, we're going to look at the material type. This determines the luminance or reflectance of a surface. When you choose a material type, only the settings that apply to that type are available for editing. So as an example, when we look at the generic option, every one of these options is available for me to select and adjust. The generic option is a material that is used to simulate most surface types. This will let you define each of the variable factors like I was specifying, the opacity, the specular, and the reflection, without the restrictions of any lighting model. If I select the diffuse option, this simulates a rough or matte material that appears slightly bright from all viewing directions. This is more suited for materials such as brick or matte paint, and as you can see, I cannot adjust any of the variables below that. Next is lamper. This will simulate a matte or non-shiny surface with no specular highlights. This is ideal for materials such as chalk, pottery, matte paint, or any unpolished surfaces. The next option is fawn, and this simulates a shiny surface with specular highlights. This is more commonly used for materials such as polished wood floors and metals. We're using a brick material or a stone material, so I'm going to select the generic option to bring that back up. Off to the right hand side, we have an energy preservation, and this just refers to the notion that the outgoing energy cannot be greater than the incoming energy. Based on the combination of your diffuse, opacity, and reflectivity components, this value will adjust automatically as you edit those properties. For more realistic materials, this value should be equal to or less than 1. And as you adjust your values, you'll notice that that number will climb or decrease. If it gets higher than 1, it will highlight in red. You can still use it, but you can also use those adjustments for your emissive, opacity, and specular and reflection to reduce that value back to something under 1. Next, we're going to look at diffuse. So the color or texture that you want to apply to the material as seen in a 3D rendered view or 3D outline display mode is selected from here. You can enable the color radial button to display the material in a solid color. So if I select the color option, I can now open that up and select a specific color that I want to use. This will also give you the ability to use the color swatch, so you can create your own color as well. Once you've selected your color, you can use the slider to adjust the luminance of that diffuse color. If you're going to use a texture, we can select the texture radial button, and this will apply a texture to the surface. To select a texture or to specify a texture mapping properties, you can click on the texture swatch to display the texture map dialog. And I'm going to open that up, and that will bring up the texture mapping dialog for us. And in here, this is where you can hit the select option, which will allow you to select a texture from our textures library that ships with the program itself. But in here, we can also adjust certain values or variables for that particular texture. In this case, we're using a stone texture that has a certain amount of stones visible in that scene. So since we know that this has multiple stones, we can see that it's set to be set at 8'6" by 8'6". So what we're saying is each stone has its own height that will create that texture height for us. If I was using a brick material that only had 4 bricks, then I would know that each brick height is about 3 inches high. So I would say, well, I know that my texture height needs to be 12 inches. because I have 4 bricks at 3 inches high. So this value here, adjusting your height and your width, will allow you to create that texture to make it look more realistic as it's being applied to your surface. We also have a constrain option, and that is what the lock does. So whatever you do to the height or to the width will also adjust the opposite variable. If you want to have a different number here, simply unlock it, and you can now type in your own values for the tile height and tile width. We also have a tile vertically and tile horizontally checkbox by default. This will basically allow you to tile that texture vertically and horizontally on your screen, so that way when that material is being applied to the surface, it's going to repeat both vertically and horizontally. We also have a make magenta color transparent, and this is available for you for any bitmap images that you have that you want to actually see through. So for example, a door that has a glass insert, you would be able to set that glass insert to be a magenta color, which is 255-0255 in the RGB value, and make sure that you check this option so that way when you insert that door, you'll see through the glass area that you specified. We also have a texture intensity, and this setting lets you control the brightness and contrast of the texture. You can again specify a value from 0 to 2 here. By default, most textures are set to 0.8, but you can adjust that as needed for any texture that you've added in. I'm just going to click cancel because I don't need to adjust anything else on that. And next we're going to look at bump. So bump simulates the actual bumps and wrinkles through small displacements of the surface. The modified surface is then used for lighting calculations. This is perfect for brick, tile, or anything with a non-flat texture. To use the texture selected in the diffuse section as your bump texture, you just need to ensure that the lock icon next to the bump texture swatch is closed. So here, instead of using a specific texture, we're going to say I want to use that actual texture. To use an actual texture as our bump texture, we want to ensure that the lock icon next to the texture is unlocked. This will allow us to now adjust and select a different material. So if I select this option, it's going to again bring up that texture map, which will allow us to select a different material. A majority of our textures that have a bump look to them will have a normal map image created for them, and that is the case here. So we have a stone material, and we've created a stone normal, which is an inverse image of that texture. And what this does is it goes through and it finds all the highlights for us automatically. The one thing we need to make sure we adjust here is it needs to be set to normal. We also want to make sure that the tile height and tile width match exactly to what our texture tile height and tile width are, so that way when they are overlapped, those highlights and lowlights will be visible in the exact same areas. I'm going to say OK to that. And next we're going to look at emissive. So the amount of light given off by a material is controlled through the emissive. Here you can click the color swatch to select the color of the light that is going to be emitted. You can use the slider to adjust the level of emissivity. The more emissive a material is, the more self-luminous it appears. Next is opacity. This determines how transparent the material is. Think of this as a mask being applied over the surface. You can click the color swatch to select a color for the opacity mask. Use the transparent opaque slider to adjust the level of transparency. Use the dull gloss slider to specify the glossiness of the opacity mask. So here we have our opacity. We can turn that to be as transparent as we want, and then we can adjust how that material is going to look, be it dull or glossy, by adjusting the slider here as well. And I'm just going to set those back. And next we're going to look at specular. So this is the reflection that creates highlights on materials, making them appear shiny. You can click the color swatch to select a color for the specular highlights. Use the slider to adjust the intensity of the highlighted color. The higher the value, the lighter the color, and you can use the dull shiny slider to adjust the size of the highlights. Next is reflection. This refers to the throwing back of light by a surface. This is used to simulate reflective objects like mirrors and shiny surfaces. You can click the color swatch to select a color for the reflected light. Use the slider to adjust the amount of reflection. Use the sharp blurred slider to determine whether the surface reflects the selected color or its surroundings. A note here that the blurred effect may increase your rendering times. Index of refraction. So this is the IOR section. This describes the way light bends when crossing the material surface. A value of 1 means the light will not change direction. Selecting a material from the drop box, when we open up this area here, will allow you to populate the index of refraction edit box with the index of refraction for that material. If you would prefer to specify a custom value, you can select the custom option and then type in the value that you want for that index of refraction. And you can do search online for index of refraction and see different types of materials that will have an IOR value that you can type in. Next is the Fresnel checkbox. And when the Fresnel checkbox is enabled, this will calculate the reflection strength dependent on the viewing angle of the surface. So some materials in nature, such as glass, reflect light in this manner. Note that the Fresnel effect depends on the index of refraction as well. Off to the right hand side here we have a drop-down box, and this is the sphere box drop-down. This allows you to specify the way the 2D texture is applied to a 3D object. The basis of the sphere mapping is to treat the object as if it was a sphere. A single texture is applied to the whole object, and the texture mapping coordinates are generated based on the angle of the surface at each point. Box mapping creates a rectangular bounding box around the element, then applies a texture to each of the box's 6 sides. This would be useful for an element such as a sofa. So as we look at this, we can see the sphere, and when we select box, you can see that it applies that texture along each 6 sides. We hope this tooltip helps you moving forward. Thank you.